David is also, and it's the purpose of the work he's preparing now, is the question of how do you integrate AI and art? And that's the item who will be developed by David in his presentation. And our question is, at the end, do we buy a work from David Claerbout, or do we buy a work from the computer? Do we buy artificial intelligence? Can you survive the power of AI? Is AI taking the lead? Those are the questions we asked David, and now he will find an answer on all that. But of course, I hope he will show also a bit of his work from before and the beautiful. For me, he's one of the most important Belgian artists of today. For me, he's the most important one. And you'll see his work, but of course I also have to say he's born in '69 in Kortrijk. So that's a small reason in plus to explain. And I give him the floor. David, it's up to you.
Thank you. I think thank you, Stefan, for this flattering words. I hope I can deliver. Because as you will see, a trajectory of an artist and his studio, or her studio, is more a trajectory of accidents and inspiration rather than planning. I'm going to give you a bit of an insight of the past 49, I counted them because of this occasion, I counted the works that I had made, 49 pieces involving technology and film, mainly. But of course, next to that, I did hundreds of ideas in development which were never really materialized or born. I'd like to think of them as being born. There's a birth date to each of the works. And of those, I have brought a small selection, so that I'm going to attempt to give you an insight in what is this triangle of technologies that I'm using, which is cinematography, then one should say contemporary art, and CGI, it's computer-generated imagery, which has been, which I fell in love with some 15, almost 20 years ago. Recently, and partly thanks to you, I got invited to be involved in a research project involving AI. I shook my head when I got the invitation, didn't know exactly what to do with large language models, but I'd had an interest in brain science for many years. So I read, let's say, something, or the summary of most of the important books around brain science of the past 10 years. So my interest was very much provoked when I saw these similarities with neural networks and how a brain scientist thinks about neural networks. They're not always friends. So we'll get to there in the end, but maybe let me start with the very beginning. When I arrived at the building here, we met a gentleman who is responsible for cybersecurity. And the first thing that came to my head is this work. It's called Present, which is actually designed to be a virus. And it's developed together with the Dia Center for Art in New York around the year 2000. The development of the virus went very well in Europe and was tested in a limited way. But when we went for a week to New York, the virus got immediately to some kind of firewall, and they said, no way that you can that we can unleash a virus on our website. Basically, it's a friendly virus. All it does is it prevents from being deleted. It's basically a file that you send. Imagine, it's more than 20 years ago. It's actually 24 years ago. It's a virus or a file that you send to a friend, and it develops in a living flower. And this flower lives on your desktop. It becomes either a file on your desktop, or it becomes your background of the desktop, the screensaver. And it just fades in real time over the course of a week. And you had the choice of 3 flowers, if I remember correctly. I believe the work still exists. I think you can still download it, but of course the viral character has been deleted. I had to agree with that, which was of course very sorry. And it just fades. When it fades, it leaves a message which you can then again send to a friend. So it was very much inspired by the internet as a gift economy. Imagine how times have changed. Huh? Like around the year 2000, we're still thinking about the internet in sort of social, almost quasi-communist way where you would really educate everybody with free information. Then the next piece is a few years later, is very simple interactive work, and it's part of the Proximus collection. It's called Man Under Arches. And Man Under Arches is nothing else than a static image of two black holes with a passage to the left and to the right. One could say it's a sort of real size facade of a building. When you come in to the gallery, or when you come into the space, there is a triggering that commands to the work to stop functioning. And what is actually happening is very simple. Is a character that walks away for the last time as you enter. And he doesn't come back before the room is empty again. Sort of inverse of wanting to show yourself to the public. A way of, putting into a work of art a certain shyness of being publicly there. The second work that is in the Proximus collection, and of which I'm very proud, but is a little bit sophisticated sometimes to show to public, is a piece called Radio Peace Hong Kong. And it's based upon images that I had found of Kowloon, which is this quarter of Hong Kong which used to have the most famous vertical slum. They're now all gone since, I believe, 15 or 20 years. They've been replaced by healthy buildings. But there were a sort of police-free zone within Hong Kong. And they had terrible hygienic and terrible conditions to live in fact. People lived on a few square meters already more than half a century ago. And I thought, well, I have an idea. And I always work with new experimental technologies. I'm mainly attracted about the things that I don't know, and I want to get to know them. Therefore, I don't work with the specialists, but we go about with a small group of artists, we go about fishing and finding out how do we realize it. And I thought this small spaces in which people are living in Hong Kong, in fact, represent the lack of living space beyond anything that you could consider as healthy or as dignified, or it's just plain terrible. If you have to put your mattress down at night and you have to put it up like that, and it occupies your wall, and then you have to use the sink to do. It's this way of no one of us wants to live like that, basically. And I thought this lack of space. I was thinking about ideas of the virtual. What is virtual? Virtual, does it mean, because every decade has his power words. Huh? Today it's AI. 20 years ago or 15 years ago, it was virtuality. What is virtual? Virtual, does it mean the absence of reality? Does it mean illusionary? And I thought, no, actually, virtual is part of your sensorial system that still believes everything is coherent. And I was working with what we call binaural sound. And these are these sounds that mimic the way your ears take in the auditory parts of the world. And the beauty of it is that you can put those in a headset and you can later put them on your head, and you can, it's almost perfect hallucination of feeling people walk around you, breathing into your ear, smoking a cigarette and blowing the air out into your ear. This very uncanny way of, you can't shake it off. It's very real, although it's virtual, but all of everything you are says, no, this is a reality around me. And I wanted to combine those two. So I said, I'm going to make a piece which is both audio with binaural sound and film. And we started with, actually this is a torn up poster of a Zen garden in Japan. Low quality, and we start with that. And we basically, what we do is, we go from one virtual space into the other. The camera goes backwards about 100 meters. Technically, you need to think for a long time about how to figure this out, how to make those scenes fit into one another. And we will do that, but we will make the sound coherent and very wide and very spacious. So we'll use music, binaural music. We'll use people walking around and speaking in the space. And essentially, we start with this low-res image, but it soon appears this is not the world, but it's actually just a poster pinned on the wall, the back wall of one of these apartments, these slum apartments in Hong Kong. And then there's two musicians that are actually discussing in Mandarin what they're listening to. And I didn't work with actors, I worked with two real musicians. In fact, up to this day, we don't know exactly what they're saying to one another. But they are hearing exactly what you are hearing as an audience. And I know this sounds complex, but it's very real when you have the headset on your head. And they start discussing, one lights a cigarette. And okay, we've been in two spaces. We've been in a Zen garden, now we are in a small apartment. As the minutes go by, we cross the window of this small apartment, rusty, dilapidated building as it was. From the moment we are in the window, we're actually sound-free. We hear a wide open sound of the street and of the outside. We're not hearing anymore the conversations. And we go further and further and further until we see the complete building and the silence. And then as a little cherry on the cake, when the film ends, we actually have someone walking out the exhibition space. It's really confusing. Some people freak out when they hear it, because they think they're outside of the scene, and all of a sudden they realize, when you have the headset on, there's somebody very close to you that's in the film, but at the same time with you in the exhibition space. I don't know if it makes a lot of sense what I'm saying, but it's a spatial and auditory complexity. Then on to another work which I've selected for you because it's, again, technology combined with art. And in my work, time is important. Why? Because as artists, we have a tendency of thinking everybody's in a hurry, but we have all the time in the world, which is of course not true. I work to deadlines like everybody else, but conceptually at least, nobody's waiting for what I'm doing. And so I have a tendency of working 2-3 years on a single film, and I thought, okay, at one point I got an idea, and when artists have an idea, it's like falling in love. There's nothing you can do about it. You just have to answer to it. Even if you are, in my mind, a rather technologically complicated person. You always want to look for new challenges and you want to really look for impossibilities. So the start of this film, which is a film start, is in March 2016. And it's been running, this film has been running and will end until March 2016. The building you are seeing, of which this is an acrylic sketch that I made during the production, is, as you can read, the Olympic Stadium in Berlin. And I did a lot of acrylic studies or small and bigger studies on how I wanted to do this, but the idea is very simple. We will take what the, let's say, the people who conceived as the Third Reich was the idea of time as eternity, 1,000 years. Where they got 1,000 years from to make a Reich is an open question, nobody really knows. But 1,000 years seems to be long enough to be bafflingly long, impossible to grasp. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because if we can't grasp it, then why did they have plans to realize an empire, which ahead of schedule would be planned for 1,000 years? And of course, this Olympic Stadium is standing there. It's being renovated, it's being maintained, it's being cleaned up, as in Berlin happens to many of the buildings. They're being beautified and made ready for tourism, or for concerts, or for football games. And I did the opposite. I said, I'm going to use this 1,000 years to make a software program, to develop a software program that will have the surroundings of the Olympia Stadium and the stadium itself inside, so inside and outside. We will have the vegetation grown uninterruptedly. So the vegetation grows invisibly, imperceptibly, but after a year, if you come back, you see that everything has pushed up a bit higher. After a few years, there's even some trees that start to eclipse the image. They start to get in front of the image. And what's more is that that's the beauty of computing. When you make the dance with computing and information beautifully, you can even determine exactly the position of the sun in which season. You can even download the information from the weather patterns, and you can put that all in real time into a single video piece. So that was my project. And I said, okay, I'm mortal, so I'm going to be responsible for 1/4 of a century. And then I give it out to whoever, university or other. Maybe, I think in the future, people will do prompts with AI and they will generate the next 25 years. Here you see it installed for the first time. So we call it a techno-hippie work. Techno because it's reliant very much on software. And I've always thought of software as something that replaces eternity. Yeah? Hardware is discarded immediately, but we think of software as something ungraspable. In fact, I believe that today, the way we think of AI is a progression of this idea of looking for a component that we think of is eternal or bigger than us, almost organic. And this is, of course, always a fallacy. The people who work in those technologies know what it is about. But it is important that we can live with those technologies and hang on to them and believe that they're bigger than us. So software, in fact, makes this choreography here with 1,000 years concept. The hippie effect is, of course, the vegetation. Why plants, why trees, why grass? It's a sweet revenge, one could say. And it's shown on 2 screens, so we basically have 2 images of the Olympic Stadium, which you can visit at any time. And it was shown for the first time in Berlin. That was in the end of 2016. And I remember one morning in February of the next year, of 2017, I received a phone call. And the exhibition was still on. They said, David, you have to know, it's snowing in Berlin. It's snowing a lot. Berlin is snowing under. And you know what's amazing is that it's snowing also in the film. And we had people going back and forward between the exhibition and the Olympia Stadium to check out on me, to check out if my software was correct. To be honest, I was sweating a little bit because we had never, in fact, live tried if the snow was in sync, because during the development we didn't have any. So it was a big relief to see that the software was robust. And then came the second challenge: is how do you work with algorithms that determine how humid, how dry, have the seasons been very sunny or have they been very cold and wet? And this, of course, has its effect on the vegetation and on the growth. Plus, of course, what also has an effect is if you are on the north of the south side of the stadium. On the north side, it's very damp and there's very little light. On the south side, there's a lot of sun. And so we worked with botanist, biologist, and of course, I forgot now how you describe it, but these are people who study the decay of architectural materials. And because this was, of course, very important to the Germans at the time, is to work with local materials, materials that could stand a long time. But in fact, it was a big lie, because the whole Olympic Stadium is built like a theater. It falls apart very quickly. They had to, for the Weltmeisterschaft in 2005, I believe, they had to redo the whole fundamentals of the building. It's a sandy soil, it's built in a hurry. So it's basically a piece of theater pretending to be something that aspires to be eternal. My work is exactly that. It's a piece of theater that is pretending to be eternal. Because of the subject matter, it was not an easy work to show. Because of the political connotations. This is screenshots that we take every day. In fact, we gather screenshots, and that's the only trace that remains of the work. So this is early spring 2020. And it's actually, the camera is moving constantly around the building. And whether it's sunny or gray or snow or rain, it's all translated in real time. I will go even further. In fact, you can, and I challenge anyone, you can go and check if the stones of the building are on the correct place. Because this was, for me, conceptually important, that when we did the scanning, which we did with a pole full of cameras stacked, and we literally, I didn't do it fortunately, walked around the building with a pole about 3 meters high with cameras on top of it. We scanned the building, which allowed us to put the stones exactly. So in fact, we did something that totalitarian proposals or totalitarian thinkers would do. They would go like, almost like someone suffering from autism. They would go very deep into calculation. And we would confront that with the vegetation of the growth of vegetation, I mean. So the work is designed to fail. Am I on schedule? Am I doing? Oh, I have to hurry. So I jump to the next, which is a far more recent work, but again has to do with growth. And we call it backwards growing tree. It's in fact based upon almost one-on-one model that I found in my walks. This is south of Modena in Italy. It's in the hills of Emilia-Romagna. And it's a small tree. I've been looking for it for many years. I have always my camera with me. I gathered hundreds of trees. And one summer day, I found this one. We were developing this already for a few years. And we accomplished the work about a year ago. What's going on? It's designed to be a mirror for time. It's designed to be consumed privately. So let's say you are a person and you own the work. It lives for about 5 years, a little bit, between 5 and 6 years. And what you see is a young tree growing in real time, with a catch. It doesn't grow forward, so it's not growing bigger and bigger, but it's shrinking. It's going back in time. So what we did is similar to the Olympia project. We gathered information from the, I believe it's called the Copernicus database, a European database which gathers weather information on all possible locations in Europe. When we conceived the work, it didn't exist yet, but when we then started to execute it, fortunately, this database was usable. So we add that weather information, and the piece shrinks back in time. So it becomes a small tree until one day, after 5 or 6 years, you have to pay attention, you have to put your clock. There are 2 people actually planting the tree. But because the work grows backwards, they are in the film, they're actually ripping it out, and they're walking backwards like this. It's 15 minutes that you, in an existence of 5 to 6 years, that you can see that the film is running backwards. At no other moment can you see it. It looks completely coherent with forward-looking time. Some impressions, it goes on night and day. Very small changes. Today we are at this point because we just launched it last year, and we are simulating it to become this. It's impossibly non-sexy motive. It's a tree. Who cares about trees? But I always had this both this love relationship with technology and nature, and this almost incompatible concepts of time. When you look at the tree, you can't see it changing. You can only see it changing when you come back year after year. And it's this concept of time which is beyond us. But when we look at the clock, we think we can measure that time. So it's these opposites. Here we show it on a LED wall, which is a technology that I love a lot, but unfortunately at the moment it's not very sustainable. It's high in consumption, but it's very beautiful as a material. This is a version in a projection. And then these are again, this is anachronistic. I play a kind of chess game with my computers. Our computers, because we are a team of artists working together. I'm perfectly incapable to put something together like that, but I can draw and I can paint, and I get the results of what the computer says is a way of calculating light and the breaking of the sun during the different seasons, and then I go about making counter proposals, and these counter proposals are then being scanned and are being fed to the computer. And then we see who's the best in the two. This is part of my studio when I draw. And the more recent work even is this piece, which is called Birdcage. We used to call it exploding birdcage. And it's nothing else than a 3-dimensional explosion with lots of debris being vomited out into the air, coming right at the camera over the course of about 20 minutes. So it's extremely slow. It's again a work made with both cinematography, CGI, and a lot of patience. This doesn't involve any AI work at all. Everything is designed by hand. And of course, where AI is used is in the physics models of simulations. I'm always surprised and in wonder and in awe of how these physics simulations that we are using in animated video are so much alike the real physics that you have when a real explosion occurs. There is a little detail in the middle. I called it bird cage. There's actually a cage with 2 birds which is also exploding. So unfortunately, you're supposed to see the last moment of 2 birds. which is of course not true because it's all an animation. And it's also silent, so it's a combination between a very meditative film and a very aggressive explosion. And then it just, as if nothing happened, it continues to, in the same camera movement, it's without interruption, there's no, so again, to design this film is very complicated. You need to have a lot of conversations with your technicians to design this. And we see the same birds being healthy and well in front of the garden. They're almost talking at you, and then they're flying away. After which we loop, we make a loop, and it begins again, and it does so for many times in a row. In fact, because I gathered a lot of footage, because it might surprise you that these pieces are in fact entirely filmed on location, and then only later the film is changed into CGI, into computer animation. So this is something that I learned to be wise. If you want to work virtually well, you actually have to learn how to be in the reality very well. You actually, it's like if you want to know how a forest looks like virtually, you have to do a lot of walks in the forest. And so we filmed the whole film. Here you can see more or less the speed by which the camera is approaching this building. It's horrendously slow. It takes about 15 minutes to get there, to get to the zoomed in part. So that all requires a lot of patience. And of course, a lot of, how you say it, petty criminal plans. You have to, like, we're a small team, we're not a big team, this is a small studio. I work with small budgets. Although sometimes, I think the maximum I spent is about €500,000, and that was something I never did again. But we do spend quite a bit of time producing that. And you always have to put your heads together and design this complicated film. And one of the steps is, of course, you never get birds in front of your camera because birds fly out. So we designed a cage, a friendly bird cage, and we had the two birds posing for us in a captivated manner for about 5 days, and then we gave them back to the owner, but with a simple screen behind it. So these are this type of, old school technologies. Here again, a scan of the same building. Excerpt of the physics model of this explosion. And here it's dressed up with everything. So there was a coffee table also, and glasses and porcelain. And there you see this sort of love for detail and for what is almost a painterly quality. Yeah? Is that it's not about the spectacle, but it's about the enjoyment of light and of matter. This is the model of one of the birds as it is melting away. Again, another simulation, some drawings, which is at the end of the day what I prefer to do. So I have this team there of 6, 7 people working, and I love to be in my drawing studio and actually prepare for them how I feel the work should look like in the end, what type of light it should have. But one of the reasons why I went in to work with technology and with cinematic art is because I was trained as a draftsman, as a painter, but I saw absolutely no future for myself in that. I wanted to experiment with technologies and I wanted to experiment with time, but I also didn't have a background in cinematography or even in photography. I didn't even know how to handle a camera. So it's definitely a sort of self-made trajectory. Everything we do is highly experimental. Then I maybe wanted to show you a few things, a few fragments, just a scrapbook of notes that I make around something that I got interested in long before I started working with AI, is brain science. Because why? Because when you're a cinematographer, you work with one lens. So you basically work monofocal, which is in opposition to our bodies and to nature, is that it's bifocal. We are divided in everything we do. We have a left and right hemisphere. We have a corpus callosum in the middle. We have something negotiating between two opposite sides. But yet, visual culture, just like writing and drawing, is all about putting things on flatness, on a paper or on a screen. And I was very much intrigued by that. And I wanted to know more about perception. How do organisms perceive? Not only human beings, but what do we have in common about the way we see? And that sucked me into the chapter of brain science and of which I, of course, practice as an absolute non-scientist. But I had the privilege and the pleasure to talk to many people in the field about this matter. And it's been a bumpy trajectory because there's a lot of egos there who will constantly say how wrong you are or how wrong their colleagues are. And you can imagine my surprise when AI started to become to the foreground and developers were speaking about neural networks. I thought, interesting. Let's see if I can find people who are proper brain scientists, neuroscientists, and people who are proper developers to see if they actually think in similar matter. As it turns out, yes, on an experimental level, decades ago already, there were people, as some of you probably know, people working in neuroscience that went over to computer science and vice versa, by the way. The CEO of Handspring, Palm, is a very interesting neuroscientist nowadays. When he sold his company, he founded a new company. I forgot his name now, but he founded a new company and he's doing wonderfully interesting work in that department. So just some of my notes, we can't talk too much about it. And then maybe I thought just to, give off a little bit what I'm reading recently. There's one book, History of Artificial Intelligence by Melanie Mitchell, which I can recommend and very readable, but it's a bit for nerds. It's a history, so artificial intelligence has been with us for many decades. One should say basically Cold War period is where the first spring of artificial intelligence really started. There have been many winters, many absolute dead moments. And what we live now seems to be a breakthrough on a much wider area. And then a lot about the brain, a lot about consciousness, of course, because when we speak about artificial intelligence, what do we mean? Do we speak about artificial consciousness? And the guy here to the right, Michael Graziano, who has a wonderful scientific theory about what consciousness is, not metaphysical. It's very interesting. Any child should basically learn how the principles are of how we perceive the world in terms of models and how that generates consciousness. All that things. Language, Phantom in the Brain is a book it's very hilarious to read, by V.S. Ramachandran, who's now one of the monuments of neuroscience and who can speak in a very inspiring way about his experiments. He was always working low budget as a medic, And because he had no money, they developed some wonderfully powerful tools to treat patients. Another very important book, I would say, is The Master and His Emissary by a man called Ian McGilchrist. And Ian McGilchrist has become now a superstar. When I got to know him, he was still, well, he was already big, but he was still breaking through. But now I don't even get to talk to him or even send him an email anymore. He's a very busy man who actually inspired me about going deeper into what's the relation between perception, visualization, and the brain and organisms. And yeah, so maybe in order to pause this for a moment, I'll go on and show you something, 3 pieces that I started and that I'm still developing, which were, since a year, we are working with part of my team specifically in generative artificial intelligence and using it as a way to pre-visualize the films. And I'm happy to say that I somehow, when I started this trajectory initiated by Gluon, on doing research between my work and artificial intelligence, I said from the outset, it's going to be about photographic results. It's going to be about artificial intelligence and how it generates a photographic coherent environment simulation. And one of the first tests that I did, so I opened my drawers and I took a lot of old ideas and I wanted to test them with 1 or 2 people in my studio. And it's amazing how much has changed in a year, because we speak about software that appears every week for us. So we work in a really narrow section of that technology, generative AI for visualization. Every week there's a new tool that appears. But this idea we started about a year ago when we started this research, and it's based upon 2 drawings. The left drawing is when I made this sort of official-looking visit of a factory where they process eggs. One of the eggs has hatched into a small chick. And of course, you can see the metaphor is industrialization on one hand, and, well, the beauty and the horrors of it, and on the other hand, it's real life, organic life. And how organic life can throw everything upside down and generate this tension between those 2 realities. And this is the first proposition I made. We encountered a lot of difficulties in making AI understand, or the different apps that we use, making them understand what we wanted. They were all about cliches, but I say it's a year ago. So a year is a very, very long time in this development. It goes very fast. And a year ago, we didn't have satisfying results. So we picked up, so I wanted to make actually a film with that. So we picked up other ideas. Among them this, again based on 2 found images that I found in a book. These are literally scans from a book of a man who has retired from business life and who's spending his time carving spoons. ASMR. You know, ASMR activities it's tactile, it's what they treat people who have young people mainly, who have sensorial trouble of having looked too long at the screen. Is you do something, you learn a craft, whatever it is. It could be carving a spoon and learning the craft on your own. And he's basically, the concept of this film that I want to make, and which is heavily reliant on AI this time, is that we have an inside and an outside. So we have a forest and we have a villa, which is like a UFO smacked into that forest. And this is one of the early models that we had designed in CGI, so this is very low resolution. And basically, It's similar, you could say, to Olympia. It's a transformation of time into matter. He's in the house and he's spending his days carving this wood. Meanwhile, during the course of months, up to a year, the wood is actually losing the forest, sorry. The forest is losing the wood. And therefore the working title is it a forest or is it wood? So it's shrinking down, the trees are disappearing, and what he's doing, this guy who's doing the carving inside the house all the time, he's accumulating the spoons. So it's a bit of a horror story with absurd motif, one should say. But very important for me is that the impulses that I give through the film are ASMR. They are automatic sensorial meridian response. It's actually nonsense, but it's a way of saying all these sounds and images that you can sensorially adapt very quickly and which bring you down, which bring you calmer. And this is one of the images that's generated with AI, so we use this for pre-visualization a lot. And I'm in fact feel now, at this point in time, like a kid in a candy store, is that the development of works goes very fast. This is generated entirely based upon text material, but for us, artists working visually and with sound, what of course matters is that we can propose drawings to AI. So I go to my studio, I draw it. Even if it's 4 lines, we propose it to AI and AI says, okay, I know this. I have to build a world out of that. We get the proposition back, it's completely wrong, and we keep on prompting. It's a very new world of developing a film because the difference is before we were always thinking in abstraction until very far ahead in the production. Now, with this, we actually produce the final scenes immediately. Because to my experience, AI is not what I initially thought it would be, a super predictable, conscious-free, artificial, everything, that should be opposed to art. No, on the contrary. I feel it's like I would have a conversation with a trusted person about a difficult topic, and instead of getting one weighted, careful answer, I get millions of answers. And I get the best of the answers that I can get. At least if I understand the language of the technology, if I know how to prompt, and the prompting, by the way, will be quickly over. Today there's prompting engineers, but that will, I believe, a very short period in the evolution of the technology. So all this, for example, is designed, and I realized that AI here had done something great. It had made me see that in the plan for this film, that actually what I want to have a view to the outside world, to this forest, as a screen. And not as a real view to the outside. And there, I'm on my knees and I'm thanking forever, thank you, because in a few weeks' time we develop something like this. So for pre-visualization, it's been heaven sent. And then with combinations of film footage that I make from people who do these things or that I find on the internet, we make sketches. And since last week, this film has been developed, and we know that it will take about a year time. It will be a film, it's again one of these long pieces, but it will take a year before the forest diminishes, slims down, and his back room, where he finishes all the spoons very carefully, his back room becomes a sort of horror story where he accumulates things. Now, what AI is, for us at the moment, is very good at is making bold statements and daring to propose what actually, as artists even, you don't have the imagination for, or even as draftsmen. But what is very bad is to actually say, generate me this image -1 spoon. Generate me this image -2 spoons. So what I learned the hard way is that if you want to do something like that, you actually need to train your own models. And training your own model is a very lengthy process, as we discovered, and is actually not available to creative people in general. I wonder if it's necessary. I honestly don't think so, because it's in the hands of the industry. And the creative people just have to be clever enough, understand what the weekly updates are about AI, and pick them up. But there's a whole new world opening up. Obviously, there's also a whole new generation of artists and creative people opening up that will produce masses of nonsense. That's clear from the outset. So this is what we're preparing. We saw it happening in the art world too with NFT. I never went into it, but my friend said, "You're stupid, you could have earned a fortune." I never did it because basically my work was NFT based avant la lettre. We sold signed editions, verified by a notary already 25 years ago. So something that conceptually was similar. So that was one work, that was called The Woodcarver. I'm on schedule. This second piece that we're working on, and which was supposed to be very heavily reliant on AI, because it's attractive to subcontract these results and to go fast. But it turned out to be completely the other way around. It turned out to be something that we have to do frame by frame. And frame by frame for an animation studio is a nightmare, because it's very expensive. You rely on lots of people to make the animations for you. But like the woodcarver piece that we started there, the previous one, it's also about deforestation in a way. What we are seeing is we're trying to develop with AI a landscape that has an echo of historical painting. So one could say early Renaissance painting, early panel painting, the brightness of the blue skies, the vegetation, something really fragile and delicate. But it has to have a very far horizon. I want people to be able to dream away in this landscape. And it's just a landscape that's alive with birds and with wind and with everything in it. And of course with the weather, again. But there are 5 minutes of, one could say, coherent world where you see basically a painting on a wall. You could show it on a screen, you could show it on a projection like this, but it's basically behaving like a painting. And then apocalypse starts. Machines start to come in, and they start to harvest the trees in the landscape. And they begin, by the end of the day, continuing into the next day, they keep on harvesting the trees. I do not yet have proper simulations of those, because that one of the nasty surprises is that there's a lot of handmade engineering that we need to do there. And automatization and AI absolutely flip on the notion of time-lapse. The reason for it is very simple. There's very little information circling on the internet about time-lapse. It's a very niche type of film phenomena. Usually it's glamour, it's beautiful girls, beautiful boys, it's all these things. But when you go niche, you see the AI system starting to hallucinate. The hallucinations are very interesting, because shows you the reasoning. It's a little bit like, I always say, working with AI for our studio is like going shopping with the monster of Frankenstein. It's awkward. You know, before you have him dressed up, he's destroyed a lot of other things, including the street and the shops and the way to it. So at the moment we are basically working the old way with both cinematography and CGI, computer-generated imagery. And we designed this model, or actually adapt this model of a harvester. These are these heavy machines that can kill a tree in 15 seconds. And we are going to combine for this work, maybe that was not clear yet in what I said, we're going to combine the time-lapse effect of deforestation with a real-time film. And it's exactly this time-lapse that AI flips on. So that's more or less the end of the visual part of my presentation. I don't know if that made a lot of sense. I raced through this, but I'm open to any questions you might have.